delighted to be joined now by Dr. John Lee. He's a former professor of pathology and a former NHS consultant as well, and he has been one of the people we're speaking to regularly throughout the lockdown period about whether or not the lockdown was going to save more lives than fortunately it might cost. And John has been raising concerns about this, one of the first to do so, along with Carol Sikora, and he joins me right now. Good morning to you, Dr. Lee.
Good morning.
Good morning. There are still an awful lot of concerns, and you've been writing various articles recently about your concerns about going into sort of second versions of lockdowns, curfews, rule of six and all of that, and the ongoing restrictions on what the NHS is able to do. You remain concerned that we are going to lose more lives to the lockdown than to coronavirus, don't you?
Well, I think that's already absolutely clear, as the numbers that we so far have show. I mean, I think the thing is, it seems to me that people are failing to distinguish between two completely separate things. One is that this is a virus that can cause a serious viral pneumonia in some people, with certain new features to it, which is clearly true, although those people are the elderly mainly and people who have already got serious conditions. And they're failing to distinguish that between this as a serious virus. In other words, this is a virus that causes that condition in a high percentage of the population. That is clearly not true. Actually, this virus mainly hardly affects people at all. So this overreaction that we're having is almost a crisis of awareness rather than a viral crisis. And the problems that we're having are completely self-imposed rather than caused by this new virus.
Well, that's it. What do you make of the latest measures, the 10 p.m. curfew, the prospect that the rule of six, the prospect that we may have a closure of bars, pubs and restaurants and bans on people meeting between different households indoors? What do you make of the prospect of those? Will they save any lives?
I don't think so, no. I think they're totally illiberal and totalitarian, and they're completely misplaced because the people who are least susceptible to this virus are the young, working age population, people under 60. Frankly, unless you're already seriously ill with something, you have really hardly any greater chance of having a problem with this virus than you do any normal winter. Obviously, the people who are at risk from this virus are older people and people with multiple diseases. And the thing is, yes, of course, every life is important. But the point is, every single winter, old people contract diseases, particularly seasonal diseases, respiratory diseases, and they die. And it's almost like we can't have a grown-up conversation about death in this country. I mean, we have politicians apologising for every death due to coronavirus as if other deaths don't matter. But the fact is, if you're a medic and if you're like me, worked in pathology and you see what happens all the time, basically, with people's lives and with people's deaths, this is not abnormal. What we're suffering is, like I say, it's a crisis of awareness rather than anything new. And the measures that have been brought out by our politicians, we have sort of politicians doing amateur science and scientists doing amateur politics, and they mix the two together, and it's a pretty awful brew. But I think these measures are completely disproportionate.
I think you summed it up absolutely there.
As I said, if you're going to introduce measures that massively impact on people's lives, and let's also remember, life is about more than life and death. Quality of life is what makes life worth living, not just for young people who, frankly, should be allowed to go about their business and see each other. I mean, how dare they be told they're not allowed to go out? But also for old people. I mean, my parents are both 85, and I don't want to lose either of my parents. But having them both under house arrest for maybe what remains of their life, which if you're old may not be that long, what sort of quality of life is that giving you? I think many old people would be saying about these policies, not in my name.
Yeah, exactly. Not only for the sake of their youngsters, but I mean, my mother's 78. She's a former GP. She understands these things.
I mean, I've written from the beginning of this epidemic that you can't understand any numbers without context. And unfortunately, one of the ways that the government has tried to manipulate people's views on this is by not giving any context from the beginning. So this has got a name. It's got a name beloved of military and intelligence agencies. It's called psychological operations, or PSYOPs. And I have a piece on the Spiked website at the moment discussing this. And the point about PSYOPs is it tries to manipulate people's behaviour, to herd people, if you like, by only giving them selective information. And I think it's difficult to believe, from what we've seen from the government scientists and from the government, I'm afraid, from the beginning of this epidemic, that they're not simply trying to herd people, to manipulate people, to make them fear without giving them context. And of course, people like me who are professionals and other people who read around this thing can make the context for themselves. But a lot of people get all their context from the television mainly. And the television has been absolutely awfully shut down in terms of debate on this. So unfortunately, I think a lot of the fear that's out there, I understand the fear, and it's genuine fear of people, but it's fear based on incorrect and incomplete information.